Now we can focus on retopologizing a broad area, meaning the entire head minus the ear and neck, which funny enough will be about double the surface area that we've accomplished in the last 3 lessons. And the reason is because the head is basically a simple, almost spherical shape. So the topology doesn't need to be that complex. And so let's see, for one, the mouth bag that we separated still has the in-front viewport display enabled. So let's go ahead and turn that off because it's very awkward seeing that always in front. So let's disable that and Alt-H to unhide our sculpture. Go back to our retopologized mesh and enable in front. So you may notice that we're frequently changing the viewport display as well as the modifier settings. So let's go ahead and split this panel and have both at our disposal. So we can change the bottom one to be our viewport display options. And we can pin this if we click this button, meaning it'll always be the viewport display for this object, whichever object we had selected when we pinned it. And if I change to another object, we're still seeing the pin settings from the previous object. So that's going to be useful to maintain here. I can actually make it smaller since we only have a couple settings that we're focused on. And this way I have modifiers and viewport display settings available to me. And we want to turn off the subsurface modifier. And before we begin extruding more mesh components, I want to talk about the approach here because it is pretty different. Let me grab my annotation tool and let's see, we'll remove the existing annotations and add a new layer. And I'm going to change this first one to be like a bright pinkish. So up until this point, we've kind of been focusing on very specific edge flow regarding the mouth. Let's see, I think I need to change my view to be surface. Let's try that again, erasing. Okay, so yeah, we've outlined very specific edge flow around the mouth and the eyes and the nose as it kind of circles down around like this. And we've focused on individual facial features and then connected the topology in between. But for the head, it's going to be a little bit different. For me, I end up choosing between 2 main approaches, and both of which start, or whether they start or at least incorporate an edge loop around the ear like this. And the first method, which I probably do more often, is simply fanning out from this central point, right? So if we go straight lines kind of emanating like a sun all the way around, it connects nicely into the cheek. And it seems like a good idea. But the problem that inevitably comes is whenever you try and connect to the topology in the front, right? So we've got a pretty small amount of topology that circles around. And whenever we intersect with this broad topology that starts small around the ear, but then gets very, very elongated and stretched, we have extreme inconsistency. If a face is this size on the top of the head, yet if we turn on the wireframe here for our retopology, and the faces are this size on the front of the face, that is a tremendous difference. And in some situations, that's not a problem. Like if you're doing a low-res game model, for example, this might be the most efficient option to go with. However, if you intend on sculpting higher resolution details into this retopology, which we are planning to do, this presents a big problem. Because on this size face, we will accomplish that high res density necessary for pore detail much sooner than we will for faces on the top of the head. And so we either have to subdivide way past what's necessary for the front of the face, or if we don't do that, then the top of the head will always be less dense. Now, where that becomes a problem is if you're going to have a bald character. But if you're going to have hair, you might be able to get away with it. And oftentimes I do. But admittedly, this is more of a lazy approach, or if that's too negative, a quick and dirty approach. So the second approach, I think, is the better approach and kind of the necessary approach if you plan on sculpting additional detail. So let's call this one the fan approach, meaning that from the ear edge loop, we fan the edges out from that central point. And so let's talk about the second approach. I'm going to add a new annotation layer, make this one like a bright yellow. This one is based on a smoothed cube. So I'm going to call this the cube approach and hide the other layer. All right, so this also incorporates a loop around the ear. However, I want you to just focus on this area, the kind of the general shape of the head, and it's basically spherical. But instead of a UV sphere geometry, which has the poles on the top and bottom, think instead of smoothing a cube. And that's the type of topology that we want to use here. So we can really imagine it being a cube, right? If you take the corners, draw straight lines out from the corners. All right, if you imagine this, it's as if you took the edges of a cube and shrink wrapped them down onto the head. What's nice about this is if we draw our lines and keep it grid-like, we're going to end up with much more uniform topology. Now the faces all around the top of the head are much more consistent to the faces we created on the front of the face. And this really isn't that much harder to do. It is more geometry to deal with, but it's going to produce superior results and especially necessary results for when we sculpt that additional multi-res detail. So that is the approach we're going to take. And now that we are in that mindset, let's apply it. I'm going to switch back to my mouse. Turn off our wireframe display, go back to our tweak tool, and we can hide our in panel. All right, so tabbing into edit mode, something I need to think about is that the edges, our border edges, are very funky right now. And by funky, I mean that it doesn't intuitively spread out from here into that smoothed cube-like topology. So we're gonna have to figure out how to get there. And I'm gonna first start by extruding out another edge loop out from the ocular region. Okay, we can fill those up. And similar to the fan approach where we emanate from the ear, we're also going to have that issue where we emanate from the eye. Our faces get wider and wider as we spread out. And so pretty soon we're going to have to change mesh direction. We can't continue spreading out like this all the way across the head. That's just, it gets too broad. It's not ideal. It starts to produce too much stress on the topology, and you should be able to, feel it sort of. I don't know how else to describe it, but you can sense whenever your mesh is getting too stretched. And we're getting to that point, especially with faces like this. They're starting to just skew and stretch and not be that even square shape anymore. And so the way you relieve that kind of stress is going to be with a star junction. So for example, to relieve that stress in this direction, we would go straight up, we get our straight lines again, and then on the side, we extrude this way. But that leaves a gap, and to fill in that gap, we're gonna have to create a star junction. So these are just things that are going through my head as we create this. And as you get more comfortable with topology, you will too think this way. So I must have turned off clipping at some point in my mirror modifier. Let's re-enable that. And let's see. I could keep going straight up like this, but I think that's too much geometry, that 4 verts. So we can diminish that a little bit if I go up 1 and then connect over here, cut 1 in the middle. That leaves us with only 3 verts going up. Okay, so from here we can start extruding and then flattening our contour. Now, let's see, the only concerning part of the topology around the glabella is the brow, right? So it follows the shape of the brow, but it kind of generates a funky topology right in here, sort of a diamond junction that's not really doing much. So I might go ahead and just collapse this and simplify it into a star junction. That definitely keeps our geometry more even and less stressed. But the only negative potentially is that it removes a little bit of defining geometry for creases that happen whenever you furrow your brow. But I really shouldn't have to be worried about that yet. If we want to worry about deformation of wrinkles in the base mesh, I will show you how we can up-res the base mesh in a little bit. And by a little bit, I just mean a future video in this chapter. Okay, so that actually ends up being a very clean grid-like topology up here. But I've already started changing direction of the topology to ease the stress. And so at some point, probably around here, I'm going to have to start splitting off and flattening around the temporal process and zygomatic bone. I really made these kind of spiked and jagged right here. And let's see, whoops. I'm thinking right here will split off. And the split, I can go ahead and basically create a diamond, even though this is not a diamond for the purpose of just splitting one edge into 3 like we've used so far. This is just a diamond that will split off and serve to connect 2 patches. All right, so that can ease the stress a bit from the brow edges. And from here, we can start to go straight down, though we will need another one. Let's see, if I connect in here, and then let's see, we'll probably have to break off and go sideways. Let's use the active element to scale down. And I'm not worried about how messy the topology is right now. I'm thinking about how I'm going to connect basically from our face patches. When I say patch, I mean like an area, like the loops that surround the eyelids, right? So this is like a patch of topology. It can sort of exist by itself, but it needs to connect to other patches like the nose and like the mouth. Well, now we're trying to connect these patches into the cheek and the forehead. And so from here, I should be able to extrude straight out sideways. Okay, and now we're left with a straight edge, in theory, not in actuality, but this thing can be pushed straight back, and I'm going to kind of angle it downward at the ear and then scale the whole thing down. So it's all kind of shrinking towards the ear. And now we've started a pretty straight patch. And let's say I can cut a couple edge loops this way, and we've got an ugly but topologically sound start to this patch, to the whole cheek. We can just move the border. I'm going to do that trick of focusing on the border, making sure the border edges are nice and evenly spaced. And then I can select on the interior patch all the stuff that's messed up and use our vertex smooth vertices option. And hit that several times. Then G left click to snap it. Oh, okay. I have got to get better at this. None of this has been snapping. If I don't remember soon, it's gonna cause a bigger problem because now I don't really know exactly what isn't snapped. I sort of need to retrace all of my steps and go back and snap because I touched a lot of this geometry. So I really need to remind myself to check on the snapping. Okay, I don't think I touched too much in here, but it doesn't hurt to go ahead and select another patch of verts. You don't want to select too large of a patch to use this smooth vertices tool, because the larger the patch, the harder it is to snap to the surface without warping the topology. Okay, so I think we actually have a very clean cheek patch. And I am happy with this. So it sets us up with straight borders now. And when we've got straight borders, this can transition into that smooth cube topology we've talked about at the beginning. So I want to do just like I did with the annotation tool and outline our corners of the cube. And so let's just, let's start here, remembering how we drew them, how we're visualizing this cube. And I'm going to E and extrude some points that represent edges of a cube. And we'll just push this one down and worry about how it connects to everything later. But these points represent holes of the cube, and it'll be very easy to simply connect enough edges through the patches, right? So this serves as a very simple patch that we can up-res by cutting this many verts in the other side, which is 5 verts, all right? So if we cut 5 here, we can snap to the surface by hitting G, left clicking. And then once we have this patch, we can simply cut however many edge loops we need to keep even gridded topology. So in this case, I think 5 makes a pretty even grid. We can snap to the surface, and then let's see, when it does come to snapping, all right, this becomes important. I find that hitting the 5 number pad key to go into orthographic view produces better snapping results, right? It's not so warped as long as you snap in orthographic. So this is one of the very rare use cases that I use orthographic for, but I find that it does make a difference. Now, we need to continue this row of edges until we connect to this other side of the cube. So I'm just going to extrude around our ear, following that ear contour, and then finish by merging with that other vertex. Now I must have accidentally hit the measure tool hotkey. Let's go back to the tweak tool. And I think cutting one more vertex right here will keep an even edge length between this side. And how many verts is that? If I just select in here, that's 10 verts. All right, so I can cut 10 here. When it gets up to a number like 10, it's just easier to cut however many and then change the number manually rather than trying to guess with your number wheel and then count the verts as you see them. So that looks good. That means we can connect over here. Also connect 10 edges or 10 cuts. And let's G to snap it from the top. All right, looks like it got a little bit longer of an edge length towards the back. Okay, now we can fill in these faces. It means if you see this happen, it means that the normals are flipped because we turned on the back face culling option. And then remember we had 5 verts here, so let's cut 5. That's a little bit easier to visualize. And here it's going to be hard to snap perfectly, even with orthographic, because we have straight lines here, which really they shouldn't be straight if they want to connect. But it's okay. Let's connect our patches, and then we can always go back and use our smooth vertices tool to kind of align everything nicely. And then I think it was 5 verts, right? Yeah, so we can just cut 5. And at this point, you know, it'd be a good idea to kind of select a patch. When you're dealing with this many verts, trying to smooth and relax our vertices, I find that kind of selecting a random patch, right? Like as in I have this vertex part of the selection, I'm not cleanly selecting based on like a completed grid patch, right? So this is like the completed grid. I'm not necessarily focusing on a selection like that. I would rather just select them a little more random. Vertex, smooth vertices, snap. That's starting to look pretty good. Right click to, tab to object mode, and then we can right click to smooth the shading. Okay, so as we look at the back, here's a problem with the topology based on when I snapped according to a certain viewing angle. So really this needs to kind of be the inverted contour, right? All right, so let's extrude down one more large patch. I believe it's still 5. Also 5 this way. And when we've got it outlined like we have here, we can probably use the grid fill option. All right, so we'll select all of these, and then I have the spacebar key defined for my search function. Looks like the last thing I searched was grid fill, but all you have to do is type in grid and choose grid fill. Now, usually this does a pretty good job of defining it for me, but I think I need 1 span more than the vert count, right? It was 5 and 5. I need 1 span more. And then, yeah, once I move the offset around, I'll get the right connection. And then G to snap it. Okay, so here we've got the border is not completely aligned in terms of spacing. So loop tools, let's align the spacing, make it more uniform, and then select a patch, vertex smooth. I'll probably have to do it a lot. Shift R a lot, yeah, 20 times. And then just going patch by patch, relaxing our verts. We have a nice, even topology. Don't forget to hit G and then left click to make sure you snap your relaxed verts to the surface. All right, now one thing that I don't want to have is verts like this, because, or edge flow like this, because if we add a new annotation, if this is mirrored, it's going to come to a point like this. And I don't want that in the topology. I want it to be a nice, smooth transition across the horizon of symmetry. So we can go back to our mirror and enable what it looks like in edit mode and kind of fix this. You might get away with just changing the horizon of symmetry, but I'll probably select some patches and smooth them. There's always going to be some places where you need to manually tweak the verts. But this topology is going to be great for additional sculpting detail. It's going to be consistent with the face topology. It's just very, very clean, very consistent. In other words, a high quality topology. All right, so I don't want the other half anymore. It's going to always create that problem where we see the other side. And all right, so we're almost done with this. I just need to finish encircling the ear, continuing down the back of the head. So I'm just going to extrude the rest of the edge loop here. I'm not going directly into the crevice. I sort of started that way. I want to leave a little bit of space. In other words, a little bit of space to come in here and extrude directly into that crease around the ear, around the connection from the ear to the head. But for now, I'm just going to leave a little bit of space. I don't want to make my edges too long because there is a lot of detail in the ears. And if I make these edges too long, there won't be, we'll stress the topology too much to accomplish all the detail that's in the ear. So this should be enough. Okay, I think that's pretty good. And then let's say from here I connect, instead of that one, let's connect here. Okay, then I can come down. There we go. All right, so we've got our loop around the ear, and you'll notice that I kind of angled this way. If I turn on my annotations again, but I angled the topology downward because this is the flow of the sternocleidomastoid muscle. And I do want my topology to start flowing that direction, but the neck is for another video. I just wanted to make sense why I didn't start extruding straight down like this. This would have been more straight down the neck, but I am incorporating that slight angle. But from here, we should have enough topology, and we've got basically a grid fill that we can do. If I extrude all the way over to the horizon of symmetry, that's going to be too far. Let's cut it in half and then snap that half. I mean, that's going to be too far for a straight patch to stick to the surface very well. So I'm going to split it in half, connect that half with this upper edge, border edge. All right, so now we've got 4 verts to cut in. All right, that's going to be easier to snap. And then we've got 2. I think that still looks even enough. Now we can start connecting. And we just need a span with 6 verts going this way. I think that was 6. Nice. All right, so here's an example where it probably will not snap that cleanly. I went to orthographic view and then G to snap. Okay, there's a little bit of warping to deal with. But this ties in pretty nicely. Now, I don't love the way that the topology angles this way. If it's going to angle anyway, I would rather it angle kind of down like this. I think that would relieve the stress. Yeah, so let's fix that. I think it means that I need less spans. So let me undo. I need less spans going horizontally. Nuts. I thought that might be a problem. So I performed too many operations. Let's just get rid of this, select those edge loops, and then Control X to dissolve them. And instead of connecting here, I'm going to connect here. Okay, then we just need 5 edges cut. Control R. You can snap that in orthographic. And I'll clean that up in a little bit. Okay. Yeah, now when we clean it up, let's make sure that it nicely smooths around the bottom contour. kind of define that border edge, and then we are prepared to smooth verts in between. Honestly, I could have even gone less. Instead of 5 verts, I could have connected from here to here. Let's see how this smooths when we go to smooth vertices operation. I think this is going to be fine. Okay, so we've got the entire head, the scalp, the forehead, the cheek, all retopologized, and it's extremely even, very, very grid-like, and it's going to support further sculpting very well. In the next lesson, we'll focus on the ear and then finish with the neck.